Two Disagreeable Pigeons. They lived in Trafalgar Square, two pigeons, which for convenience shall be called Maud and Claude, though they didn't give each other names. They were simply mates for 2 or 3 years now, loyal in a way, though at the bottom of their little pigeon hearts they detested each other. Their days were spent pecking grain and peanuts strewn by endless tourists and Londoners who bought the stuff from peddlers. Peck all day amid hundreds of other pigeons who, like Maud and Claude, had nearly lost the ability to fly because it was hardly necessary any longer. Often Maud was separated from Claude in a bobbing field of pigeons, but by nightfall they somehow found each other and made their way to a cranny in the back of a stone parapet near the National Gallery. Oof! And they'd heave their bulging breasts up the 2 or 3 feet to their domicile. Maud would make disagreeable noises in her throat, signifying both pique and scorn. She was the same age as Claude, which wasn't young. Her first mate had been hit in the prime of life by a bus while trying to capture part of a sandwich. Maud's standoffish sounds could have been interpreted as, "At it again today, eh?" or various other taunts at Claude's virility and his groundless self-esteem. Perhaps Claude hadn't been at it again today, but his was a roving eye. Often Maud had the satisfaction of seeing Claude bested by a younger male who swooped down at the wrong moment for Claude and his newly found female. Claude would put up a blustering show, pretend he was willing to fight, but the younger male would go for his eyes and Claude would retreat. "Shut up," Claude would reply finally and settle himself for sleep. Once in a while, for a change of scene, Claude and Maud took the tube to Hampstead Heath. Rather, once they had taken the tube and found themselves at Hampstead Heath, much to their delight. Space, plenty of things to peck at. No people, or almost no people. Sometimes they took the tube for amusement, not caring where they might be when they got off. They could always find their way back to Trafalgar Square, even if they had to make a bit of an effort and fly a few yards here and there. Buses were safer as to direction, though there wasn't much to hang on to on the top of a bus. They certainly remembered the direction of Hampstead Heath, and by hopping a bus starting in that direction, there was a fair chance they'd get there, and if the bus veered, they simply flew to another bus that looked more promising. They'd made it twice by bus. However, tubes were more fun, because Maud and Claude enjoyed making people step out of their way. People laughed and pointed when Maud and Claude rode the escalators up and down. Sometimes people whipped out cameras, as in the square, and they'd be photographed by flash. "Look out, don't step on the pigeons, ha!" That was a familiar cry by now. Maud was haunted by a vague memory of a daughter who had been clubbed before her eyes on a pavement near the square. That had been an offspring by her first mate. Or had she imagined it? Maud was shy to this day of people carrying sticks, even umbrellas, of which she saw plenty. Maud would flinch and sidle away a few inches. Maud fancied that she could acquire another mate if she wished, but something, she couldn't say what, kept her with boring Claude. With mutual consent, they decided to head for Hampstead Heath one Saturday morning. Something awful was going on in Trafalgar Square. There were hordes of people, and bleachers and loudspeakers were being set up, not a day for peanuts and popcorn. Maud and Claude descended to the underground in Whitehall. "Oh, looky, Mummy!" cried a little girl. "Pigeons!" Maud and Claude ignored it and kept hopping down. They went under the turnstile, unnoticed but kicked by someone, then took the escalator down. Claude led, though he didn't know where he was going. He hopped onto the first train. "Look at that! Pigeons!" someone said. A couple of people laughed. Maud and Claude were among the few passengers not jostled. They had a clear circle around them. Again, it was Claude who led when they got off, his head bobbing authoritatively. He didn't know where he was, but liked giving the impression that he did. "They're getting on the lift! Ha ha ha!" A way was cleared for them as if they were VIPs. In the rush of people up the stairs to pavement level, Maud and Claude had to take to their wings. This left them exhausted when they stood finally in the sunlight near a news vendor. Maud started out leading. The pavement sloped upward, and this direction she took. The pavements near Hampstead Heath usually sloped upward, she remembered. Claude followed. "Ah, romance," a male voice said. The voice was wrong. Often Claude led when he wanted to appear superior to Maud, knowing Maud would follow no matter what. Sometimes it was just the reverse, and it had nothing to do with the mating urge. After 3 streets, hopping down and up curbs, Maud was becoming tired. Claude had made a wrong decision, detraining when he did, and Maud got beside him and indicated this with a glance and a derogatory rattle. She didn't know where she was, either, though she knew that Trafalgar Square was somewhere behind and to her right. No problem getting home, at least, but this wasn't the Heath. Then Maud sensed, or spotted, a patch of green ahead on the left, and with a toss of her head, which made her breast glisten blue and green in the sunlight, she steered Claude to the left. They paused to let a taxi turn, then continued. Up the curb. Now Maud could see the greenery, and she put on some speed, fluttering her wings as her feet moved in double time on the pavement. She mustered the energy to fly over the 3-foot-high rail of a little park. There were benches on which people sat peacefully, and a fair-sized expanse of green grass, untrammeled. A pond in the center. Maud began to peck. Claude noticed 3 other pigeons, a female and 2 males, not far away on the grass. They wouldn't take kindly to him and Maud, but the males were otherwise absorbed at the moment. Maud said something to the effect that Claude might try his luck there, and Claude replied promptly that she might try hers. Maud walked off, turning her back on the lot of them, including Claude. Claude was pecking at a worm and thinking that he preferred dried corn when one of the males swooped on him. The attacking bird was in better physical shape. Claude only rose a few inches in the air and slammed himself down, not to much effect. Claude beat a retreat, walking, flapping his wings and making noises to indicate that he was annoyed but by no means vanquished, and that he simply wasn't going to bother to fight. Maud affected amusement and indifference. It began to rain quite suddenly. Claude and Maud walked toward the nearest tree. The rain had the look of lasting. Should they take the tube for home? It was only mid-afternoon. Rain would bring the worms out, maybe a snail or 2. Suddenly Maud flew at Claude and attacked him in the neck. Claude was already in a bad mood, and he stalked off toward a path. When he reached the pavement, he turned smartly left. This was the way back to the tube, he thought, and it was even the direction of home. Maud followed, hating herself for following, but consoled by the fact that she had Claude under her eye, and that it was the general direction of Trafalgar Square. Claude's day would come, Maud thought. If she made sufficient effort, a younger male might actually invade their home and rout Claude from his own premises. That would pay him back for clomp. What was that? A blackness had descended. Claude was in it with her, squawking and flapping. Maud heard children's laughter. A box. Maud had had it once before, and she'd escaped, she reminded herself. The cardboard box scraped along the pavement, catching one of her legs painfully. She and Claude were tumbled suddenly upside down. They saw a brief patch of sky. Then a nasty coat or something was thrown over the box. They were jiggled and jostled as the children ran. They went down steps. Maud and Claude were tossed onto the floor of a brightly lighted room. They were inside a house. A woman shouted something. The children, 2 boys, laughed. Maud flew onto a table. It was a kitchen in one of those edifices she and Claude had often looked into through a semi-basement window. "What are you going to do with them?" "Ah!" Claude had taken off up to the sink rim. A boy came for him, and Claude hopped down into a corner by a door that was open only a crack. One boy strewed bread on the floor, which Claude ignored. Claude was interested in the door, Maud saw, but the rest of the house might not be open anywhere, so what good was the door? Maud defecated. This produced a yelp from the woman. Good. Maud knew that a dropping could go a long way. It meant contempt, for one thing. Maud had been kicked a few times, deliberately, when she'd done it on her own land, Trafalgar Square, not even meaning it as an insult. But then people weren't normal. They were insane, most of them. You could never tell what people were going to do. Peanuts one minute and a club the next. The woman was still jabbering, and there was a whoop from the boys, and they lunged at Claude with open arms, trying to grab him. Claude flew up and loosed a dropping, hitting one boy in the face. Laughter. Claude teetered on a clothes dryer near the ceiling, oscillating. A big man with a loud voice came in. Maud detested him on sight. He made a long, bellowing speech, then bent close to Maud and spoke more softly. Maud took 2 steps backward, knocking a china lid off something, keeping an eye on the man, ready to join Claude if he came any closer. The man left the kitchen. The woman was making popcorn at the stove. Maud and Claude recognized the smell. Meanwhile, the children tittered stupidly by the sink. The man came back with a tall tripod affair. Bright lights came on. Then Maud and Claude understood. They'd seen the same thing in Trafalgar Square on a larger scale. Tripods, moving platforms, awful lights everywhere that turned night into day. Now the light was right in Maud's eyes, and she turned in a circle. The camera buzzed. Maud would have defecated again, but at the moment was not able. "Popcorn!" the man cried. "Coming!" The woman swung around with the pan just in time to collide with Claude, who had been going to try the window. He had hoped that the top part might be open, but before he had time to see, he was on his side on the floor. He got to his feet. The woman spilled some popcorn on the floor near him, and Claude backed away as if it were poison. "Ha ha!" the man laughed. "Scare him up again, Simon!" The smaller of the odious two flailed his arms at Maud while the other boy stomped toward Claude. Maud and Claude rose, wings flapping wildly. Claude dropped like a fat eagle onto the forehead and hair of the bigger boy, all claws out. "Ow!" the boy cried. Maud contented herself with 2 hard pecks at the smaller boy's cheeks and as much clawing as she could get in before she pushed herself off just in time to avoid a swat of the man's fist. It was going to be a fight for life, Maud realized, and she and Claude were trapped. The woman took a broom to Claude, missing at every swing. "Open the window! Get them out!" "I'll wring their necks! They're insane!" yelled the red-faced man, striding toward the window. Maud could see that the man was angry. But who had brought them here but his own nauseating children? Maud attacked the man just as he was pulling the window down from the top. He fended Maud off with an elbow and ducked. Claude flew out the window. "Use the broom," said the woman, handing it to the man. Maud evaded the broom, flew to the dish rack over the sink, seized a saucer to brace herself, and as she took off toward the window, the saucer fell in the sink and shattered. Another cry from the woman, a roar from the man, both of which faded as Maud flew several yards with the energy of her wrath, and then she sank to the civilized pavement, where she could walk normally again and recover her breath. What a relief to get out of that madhouse! Good Lord, such people should be reported. Maud held her head high and thrust her beak forward with every step. There were groups, people, in fact, who fought for pigeons. She'd seen people in Trafalgar Square stopping boys from using guns or even from throwing things at pigeons. If they ever got hold of this family, there'd be hell to pay. Where was Claude? Maud stopped and turned. Not that she cared much where Claude was. If she went straight home, as she intended to do, Claude would turn up this evening, she had no doubt. What help had he been to her just now? None. She heard his voice. Then he appeared behind her, rushing toward her on legs and wings, looking exhausted. Maud shook her feathers and walked on. Claude walked beside her, grumbling a little, as did Maud, but gradually their sounds became calmer. They were, after all, free again, and they were walking in the direction of home. Suddenly Maud made for a bus. Claude followed, getting himself with some difficulty up to the roof. They crouched for better grip. Some buses lurched horribly. They had to switch to another bus, hoping for the best, but their instinct was right, and they soon found themselves jolting down the Haymarket. Home, and it wasn't yet dark. The sky was a smoky blue where the sun was setting. Still time to find a few pickings in the square before retiring, Maud thought. Claude was thinking the same thing, so they left the bus in Whitehall and glided down to the familiar ground. There were not many pigeons still about. Lights were coming on in shop windows. The pickings were poor and trampled, and Maud felt tired and out of sorts. Claude thrust his head in her way and seized a peanut fragment that Maud had been about to peck. Maud flew at him, flapping her wings. Why did she put up with him? Selfish. Greedy. She couldn't count on him for anything, not even to guard the nest when there was an egg. Claude retaliated with an ill-meant peck at Maud's eye, which missed her and got her in the head. Then suddenly, it was impossible to tell whether Maud or Claude moved first. They attacked a passing perambulator. They went for the baby, pecking its cheeks, its eyes. The young woman pushing the pram let out a scream and hit at the pigeons, knocking the breath out of Maud, but she rejoined Claude in the pram in a matter of seconds. A couple of people ran toward the pram, and the pigeons took off. They flew over the heads of their would-be attackers and settled in a group of 20-odd pigeons who were pecking around a litter basket. When the two people, plus the woman with the pram, came close to the pigeons, Maud and Claude were not in the least afraid, though some of the other pigeons looked up, startled by the angry voices. One of the people, a man, rushed among the pigeons, kicking, waving his arms, and yelling. Most of the pigeons took lazy flight. Maud headed for home, the nook behind the low stone wall, and when she got there, Claude had already arrived. They settled themselves for sleep, too tired even to grumble to each other, but Maud was not too tired to recall the half-peanut that Claude had snatched. Why did she live with him? Why did she, or they, live here, running the risk daily of being captured, as they'd been today, or kicked by people who objected even to their droppings? Why? Maud fell asleep, exhausted by her discontent. The incident of the pecked baby, blinded in one eye, in Trafalgar Square, inspired a couple of letters to the Times, but nothing was done about it.